The biggest mistake of my life was the 3 seconds I spent staring directly into the eyes of the campus's most dangerous enigma. Because in that moment, I didn't just lose my anonymity, I lost my soul. Welcome back to your BL boyfriend. If you're ready to dive into a world of obsession, fated bonds, and forbidden romance, make sure to hit that subscribe button, like this video, and drop a comment below telling me your favorite BL trope. Your support helps me bring these stories to life. Now, let's begin part 1 of our story. Part 1. I never thought my first day at Etheria University would turn into a complete disaster. Everyone around me was buzzing about one thing and one thing only, Kalen Vance. He was the campus's most infamous enigma, a dynamic so rare and powerful that even the most dominant alphas bowed their heads in his presence. People were practically falling over themselves just to catch a glimpse of him, treating him like some kind of dark deity instead of just another student. But me? I was just trying to survive. I kept my hoodie pulled low over my face, the heavy fabric acting as a shield against the world. My Omega scent felt unusually strong today, a sweet, cloying note of jasmine and rain that made my skin itch with anxiety. I had taken my scent blockers this morning, double-checking the dosage until my fingers shook, but paranoia still crept up my spine. What if someone noticed? What if the blockers failed? In a place like this, an unprotected Omega wasn't just a student. They were easy prey. The thought alone made my stomach twist into knots. When I finally found the lecture hall and pushed through the heavy mahogany doors, the entire room went silent. It was that suffocating kind of silence, the kind that feels like a physical weight. Every head turned in my direction, and I felt my cheeks burn under the scrutiny of hundreds of eyes. My heart hammered against my ribs as I scanned the room. There was only one empty seat left, right in the heart of the hall. And sitting next to that empty seat was Kalen Vance himself. He looked exactly like the rumors described, perhaps even more lethal. He had a sharp jawline that looked like it could cut glass, and cold, stormy gray eyes that didn't just look at people. They looked through them. He radiated an aura of dominance, so thick it felt like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. I considered just standing in the back, but the professor was already gesturing impatiently toward the empty spot. My pulse was a frantic drumbeat in my ears as I made my way down the aisle. I slid into the seat as quietly as possible, focusing all my energy on being invisible. Kalen didn't even glance in my direction. He was completely absorbed in his notebook, his handwriting sharp and precise. For a moment, a wave of relief washed over me. Maybe the rumors were wrong. Maybe he was just another arrogant rich kid who would ignore me for the rest of the semester. That relief lasted exactly 15 minutes. Halfway through the lecture, Kalen suddenly snapped his head toward me. The movement was so abrupt that I flinched, my pen skittering across my paper and leaving a jagged, ink-stained line across my notes. "You breathe really loudly," he said. His voice was a low, vibrating growl that only I could hear, but it was sharp enough to draw blood. "It's annoying." My mouth fell open in disbelief. I had been sitting here, practically holding my breath to avoid notice, and he had the audacity to complain? A surge of heat, not from my dynamic, but from pure, unadulterated anger, flooded through me. My Omega instincts were screaming at me to apologize, to shrink away, to submit to the enigma's whim. But something in me snapped. I was tired of being afraid. I turned to face him fully, meeting those cold gray eyes with every ounce of defiance I possessed. "And you're incredibly entitled," I whispered back, my voice trembling but firm. "That's annoying, too." For a split second, his eyes widened. It was a flash of genuine shock, a crack in his perfect, icy facade. He looked as if he couldn't quite process that someone, an Omega, no less, had just talked back to him. The rest of the class passed in a blur of tension. Kalen didn't say another word, but I could feel the weight of his presence beside me like a mounting storm. When the professor finally dismissed us, I gathered my things with frantic speed. I needed to get out of there. I needed air. But as I stepped out into the crowded hallway, that familiar prickle returned to the back of my neck. I turned around, and there he was. Kalen stood 10 feet away, arms crossed over his chest, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth that made him look both dangerous and infuriatingly attractive. "Which pack do you belong to?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes burning with an intense curiosity. "I'll make sure to contact them by tomorrow. You should know there are consequences for disrespecting me." My blood boiled. Who did this guy think he was? I adjusted the strap of my bag and walked straight toward him, closing the distance until I could smell his scent, something dark, woodsy, and overwhelmingly masculine. "Go ahead and try," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "I don't belong to any pack, and your threats don't scare me even a little bit. I turned on my heel and walked away, forcing myself not to look back. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. But as I pushed through the exit doors and into the cool afternoon air, I realized my hands were shaking. I had just challenged the most powerful person on campus. I didn't know it then, but my quiet, anonymous life was over. The Enigma had found a new obsession, and he had no intention of letting me go. End of Part 1. Part 2. The next morning, I knew something was catastrophically wrong the very second my worn-out sneakers hit the cobblestone pathways of Etheria University. Usually, my existence on this campus was practically a ghost story. I was the scholarship kid, the invisible nobody who blended into the brickwork and shadows, desperately trying to keep his head down and his grades up. But today, the atmosphere was suffocating. The air felt thick, charged with a strange, crackling electric tension that made the hairs on my arms stand up. It wasn't just casual glances thrown my way. It was full-on, unabashed staring. Groups of students huddled together beneath the sprawling oak trees, their voices dropping into hushed, venomous whispers behind manicured hands the moment I walked past. Alphas who usually wouldn't even acknowledge my existence were tracking my movements with poorly concealed pointing. My stomach plummeted, a cold stone dropping into an endless abyss. I pulled the collar of my oversized denim jacket higher, desperately wishing I possessed the power of invisibility, but I could feel their attention pressing down on my shoulders like a physical weight. By lunchtime, the pieces of the puzzle had clicked together in the most horrifying way possible. I sat in a secluded corner of the cafeteria, picking at a pathetic-looking sandwich, when my only friend, Jasper, slid into the seat across from me. He looked around nervously before leaning in. "Orion, are you insane?" Jasper hissed, his amber eyes wide with disbelief. "Do you have a death wish, or did you just lose your mind overnight?" "I have no idea what you're talking about," I muttered, refusing to meet his gaze. "Kalen Vance." Jasper said the name like it was a curse word. He told his inner circle about what happened in the lecture hall yesterday. He didn't even seem angry, Orion. He seemed entertained. And that is so much worse. You didn't just insult the Enigma, you entertained him. Now everyone is watching you. You're officially marked as the Omega who had the audacity to snap back at the king. Fantastic. I let out a long, ragged sigh, dropping my sandwich onto the plastic tray. Now I was officially a moving target. But as the initial wave of panic washed over me, a familiar, stubborn spark of defiance ignited in my chest. Honestly, I had been through worse. So much worse. I had survived growing up in a hopelessly underfunded orphanage on the outskirts of the city, a miserable place where Omegas were treated as nothing more than commodities, bargaining chips for wealthy alpha families. I had spent my entire life fighting tooth and nail against a system designed to crush me. I had clawed my way to a full-ride scholarship at Etheria University through sheer, bloody-minded determination and flawless academic excellence, spending countless sleepless nights studying until my eyes burned. One arrogant, overly perfumed enigma and his flock of entitled followers? That was nothing. I could handle this. I had to. I decided my best strategy was aggressive ignorance. I stuck to my routine with stubborn, almost robotic determination. Classes, library, study sessions in the quiet hall, and then a straight path back to my tiny, cramped apartment off campus. Simple, predictable, and safe. I refused to engage with the whispers. I ignored the hostile glares from beta students and the predatory smirks from alphas. I just kept my head down, focusing fiercely on the only reason I was here. To get my degree and build a future that belonged entirely to me, a future that didn't depend on the whims of anyone else. But Kalen Vance, it seemed, had entirely different plans for my life. He was everywhere. At first, my rational mind tried to convince me it was just a series of unfortunate coincidences. The cafeteria during my lunch hour? Sure, the guy had to eat, even if he looked like he sustained himself entirely on intimidation and black coffee. The library during my usual late afternoon study block? Okay, fine, maybe he actually studied sometimes to maintain his perfect GPA. The dimly lit hallway outside my obscure advanced chemistry lab? That one was significantly harder to explain away, but I tried my best to brush it off. By the third day, however, the coincidence theory was completely dead in the water. It was impossible to deny. Kalen Vance was stalking me. Sometimes he would make it blatantly obvious. He would stand at the end of a corridor, leaning casually against a pillar with his arms crossed, those storm cloud gray eyes tracking my every movement with terrifying precision. Other times, I would just catch fleeting glimpses of him at the very edge of my vision, a flash of his dark coat turning a corner, the unmistakable, imposing silhouette of him near the campus gates. Always watching, always present. It was deeply unsettling, and I absolutely hated how hyper-aware it made me. My senses, already sharp due to my dynamic, went into overdrive. I found myself constantly checking over my shoulder, my heart performing painful acrobatics in my chest at the slightest sound. I started second-guessing my routes, taking longer, convoluted paths through the oldest parts of campus just to see if he would follow. He always did. Like a phantom, he was always just a few steps behind. The breaking point happened on a gloomy Thursday afternoon. The sky outside was an angry, bruised purple, threatening rain. I was hidden away in the most obscure, dustiest corner of the campus library, surrounded by towering stacks of ancient biology textbooks, desperately trying to focus on a massive assignment. The silence of the library was usually a comfort, but today, it felt heavy. Then I felt him. It was a visceral reaction before I even heard his footsteps. The air in the aisle seemed to drop 10 degrees, the oxygen thinning out as that overwhelming aura of dominance rolled over me. My Omega instincts practically screamed, a primal warning siren going off in my brain, but I locked my jaw and refused to look up. I stared blankly at a diagram of cellular mitosis, praying that if I ignored him hard enough, he would get bored and leave. No such luck. Do you honestly think you're special? His voice sliced through the dusty silence of the library, smooth and dark like expensive velvet. A few students nearby gasped, shooting us annoyed, then instantly terrified, looks before hurriedly gathering their things and fleeing the aisle. I took a slow, deliberate breath, carefully closing my heavy textbook. I took my time, using those precious 3 seconds to lock away my trembling hands and compose my expression into a mask of pure, unbothered ice. Only then did I look up. He was standing right over my table. Close. Far too close. He was wearing a dark, tailored suit that looked effortlessly perfect, his posture radiating that infuriating blend of arrogance and power. His expression hovered somewhere between dark amusement and intense, burning curiosity. "I think," I replied, keeping my voice painfully cool and detached, "that you have way too much free time. Don't you have anything better to do than harass scholarship students? Maybe go brood on a balcony somewhere." His jaw tightened instantly, a distinct muscle jumping beneath the pale skin of his cheek. For a terrifying, breathless second, I thought I had pushed too far. I thought he might actually lose his temper, that the carefully maintained Enigma mask would shatter and he would unleash his full presence on me. Instead, something entirely unexpected and infinitely more dangerous happened. He smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It wasn't even a mockingly amused one. It was something entirely dark, predatory, and devastatingly handsome. It was the kind of smile a wolf gives a rabbit just before the trap snaps shut. A violent shiver ripped down my spine for reasons I absolutely refused to examine. "I'm starting to like you," he murmured, taking a half-step closer. His voice dropped an octave, becoming rougher, more intimate, bypassing my ears and vibrating straight against my ribcage. "This defiance of yours, it's intoxicating. Most people fold the second I look at them. But you just glare harder." My stomach twisted into a painful, suffocating knot. That wasn't a compliment. It was a threat. It was a declaration of intent. He wasn't going to leave me alone. If anything, my resistance, my refusal to bow down to him, was only making him more intrigued. I was a puzzle he was determined to rip apart piece by piece. "Leave me alone, Vance," I snapped, hastily grabbing my papers and shoving them into my messenger bag. My hands were visibly shaking now, betraying the brave front I was trying to put up. I needed to get out of there. I needed distance. I swung my bag over my shoulder and stood up, intending to brush right past him. But I only made it about halfway down the dimly lit aisle before a completely different kind of terror struck me. It started as a hot, prickling sensation at the base of my neck. Then a sudden, dizzying wave of weakness washed over my limbs. I stopped dead in my tracks, my eyes going wide with absolute horror as I felt it, the familiar, sickening sensation of the artificial barrier around my scent violently cracking. No. No, no, no. Not here. Not now. I pressed a frantic hand to the front pocket of my bag, digging around blindly for my emergency scent blocker inhaler. My fingers scraped against the rough fabric of the empty pocket. Nothing. I had used the very last dose that morning. I had been so stressed and paranoid about Kalen that I had completely forgotten to stop by the campus clinic to refill my prescription. My scent blockers were failing. Rapidly. And I was standing right in the middle of Etheria University, an institution packed to the brim with elite alphas and one terrifying enigma, who would be able to smell exactly what I was within seconds. My breathing hitched, escalating into a rapid, shallow panic. Fear clawed mercilessly at my throat. If anyone reported me for being on campus with failing suppressants, I wouldn't just be humiliated. I would be expelled. The board had a zero-tolerance policy for disruptive dynamic behavior. I would lose my scholarship, my dorm, my entire future. Everything I had bled and suffered for would be gone in a single heartbeat because of one stupid, careless mistake. I took a shaky step forward, desperate to run, but a shadow fell over me, entirely blocking my path. I looked up, my chest heaving, to find Kalen standing there. He had moved so silently, so fast. He was standing so close now that the heat radiating from his large frame practically enveloped me. But it was his eyes that made my blood run cold. They had changed. The storm-gray irises were almost completely swallowed by blown-out, pitch-black pupils. His chest was rising and falling heavily, and I watched in terror as his nostrils flared, taking a deep, shuddering breath. He knew. The blockers had thinned enough. He could smell my raw, unfiltered omega scent, jasmine, sweet rain, and pure, trembling fear. This scent, Kalen's voice wasn't smooth anymore. It was ragged, torn, strained in a way I had never heard before. The Enigma control was slipping. This is yours. I took a desperate step backward, my spine colliding painfully with the edge of a wooden bookshelf. I was trapped. Stay away from me, I gasped out, my voice breaking. But he didn't step back. He stepped closer, eliminating the tiny sliver of space I had tried to create. There was something overwhelmingly primal, almost predatory, in the way he moved now. His gaze dragged down my face, lingering on my trembling lips, before snapping back up to my eyes. Omegas aren't allowed on campus without proper suppressants, he stated. But there was no triumph in his tone, no cruel satisfaction at catching his defiant little enemy in a hopelessly vulnerable position. If anything, he sounded completely breathless, as if he were fighting a massive internal war. I could report you right now to the dean, he whispered, leaning down until his lips were inches from my ear. You know that, right? You'd be gone by sunset. My heart shattered. This was it. This was how my story ended. The great Enigma had finally found my weakness, and he was going to destroy me with it. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing myself for the final blow, a solitary tear escaping and sliding down my cheek. But the blow never came. Instead, I heard the heavy rustle of fabric. Kalen did something so entirely unexpected, so out of character, that my brain completely flatlined. In one smooth, lightning-fast motion, he shrugged off his heavy, expensive suit jacket and threw it over my shoulders. He pulled the lapels tight across my chest, completely enveloping my smaller frame in the thick fabric and his overwhelming, intoxicating scent. "Put your arms through," he ordered. His voice was a harsh, vibrating command that left absolutely no room for argument. "Now, keep it wrapped tight. And tomorrow, you better have proper blockers, or we're going to have a real problem." I stared up at him in absolute, unadulterated shock. My mind spun uselessly, trying to process this. Why was he helping me? Why would the cruel, untouchable Kalen Vance risk his own flawless reputation by covering for a defenseless Omega who had done nothing but insult him? It made zero sense. It contradicted everything the entire campus thought they knew about him. But I didn't argue. I gripped the edges of his jacket with trembling fingers, pulling it tighter around myself. The moment the fabric settled, his Enigma scent, rich cedarwood, dark rain, and an earthy spice, crashed over my senses like a tidal wave. Instantly, my panicked Omega biology recognized the scent as something dominant, protective, and devastatingly safe. My wildly racing heart began to slow down, a warm, heavy calm washing over my terrified system. It was a purely biological response, impossible to stop, even as my rational mind screamed at me that this man was danger incarnate. "Why?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a fragile whisper. I looked up into his dark, intense eyes. "Why are you doing this?" Kalen stared at me for a long, agonizingly silent moment. His expression was completely unreadable, a stone fortress hiding whatever storm was raging underneath. He reached out, his knuckles brushing briefly, almost accidentally, against my cheek where the tear had fallen. The contact sent an electric shock straight to my core. Then, he turned on his heel and walked away into the shadows of the library without saying a single word. He left me standing there, trembling in the dusty aisle, completely wrapped in his scent and his jacket, more terrified and confused than I had ever been in my entire life. End of Part 2. Part 3. For 2 agonizingly long days after the incident in the library, Kalen Vance completely vanished from Etheria University. His sudden absence left a strange, echoing void on campus, a silence that felt entirely too loud. People whispered, of course. Some claimed he was dealing with high-stakes family business for the Vance empire, while others swore he had finally snapped and gotten himself expelled. I told myself I didn't care. I repeated it like a mantra every single morning in the mirror. I do not care about Kalen Vance. His whereabouts are none of my business. But I still had his jacket. I had taken it to a discreet off-campus dry cleaner, emptying my meager grocery budget for the week just to have it professionally handled. I told myself it was simply the polite thing to do. It would be rude to hand back a wrinkled, sweat-stained jacket to the heir of a billionaire dynasty. But the terrifying truth, the secret I couldn't even admit to my own reflection, was that before I dropped it off, I had spent 2 nights sleeping with that heavy, dark fabric clutched to my chest. Even stripped of its warmth, the jacket had retained his overpowering Enigma scent, that intoxicating blend of crushed cedarwood, dark rain, and an earthy magnetic spice. Every time the panic of almost being exposed threatened to crush me, I would bury my face in the collar. My rebellious Omega instincts would instantly purr in response, flooding my system with an unnatural, terrifying sense of security. It was humiliating. I was supposed to be fiercely independent, yet here I was, biologically seeking comfort from the very man who had been tormenting me. By Wednesday morning, my freshly refilled scent blockers were securely in my system, and the heavy suit jacket was safely tucked into a garment bag in my locker. I was determined to hand it back, offer a cold, detached thank you, and erase Kalen Vance from my life for good. I was violently pulled out of my thoughts by the harsh metallic clang of the locker next to mine slamming shut. I jumped, spinning around, and all the air left my lungs in a sudden rush. Kalen was standing there. He looked different. The impeccable, untouchable Enigma aura that usually surrounded him like a force field was slightly fractured. His dark hair, usually perfectly styled, was slightly messy, falling over his forehead in loose waves. There were faint, bruised shadows beneath those storm-gray eyes, suggesting he hadn't slept in days. He wasn't wearing his usual tailored suit jacket, obviously, since it was currently residing in my locker, and the simple, fitted black dress shirt he wore clung to the broad lines of his chest and shoulders. He looked less like a campus god and more like a dangerous, exhausted human. "Where is it?" His voice was rougher than usual, a low, gravelly rasp that sent an involuntary shiver straight down my spine. I have it," I stammered, hating how breathless I sounded. I quickly spun back around, fumbling with my combination lock with shaking fingers. I pulled the garment bag out and turned to hand it to him. I had it dry cleaned. It's spotless. And thank you. For the other day. You didn't have to do that. Kalen didn't say you're welcome. He didn't even acknowledge the gratitude. He just reached out to take the hanger from my grasp. As the plastic shifted from my hand to his long, calloused fingers accidentally brushed against mine. The contact lasted less than a second, but it felt like a live wire had snapped between us. An electric, scorching heat flared at the point of contact, shooting all the way up my arm and straight into my chest. I gasped, snatching my hand back as if I had been physically burned. I looked up, my eyes wide, and saw that Kalen had frozen. His chest was rising and falling in rapid, uneven breaths, and his eyes were blown wide, staring at my hand as if he couldn't comprehend what had just happened. The air around us suddenly grew impossibly thick, heavy with an invisible, magnetic pull that demanded I step closer, demanding I close the distance between us. My Omega biology was screaming at me to bridge the gap, to submit, to let the Enigma claim the space. Kalen swallowed hard, the sharp line of his throat bobbing. He tightened his grip on the jacket, his knuckles turning white, and took a deliberate step back, forcibly breaking the invisible tether between us. "Do you live alone, Orion?" The sudden, deeply personal question felt like a bucket of ice water to the face. I blinked, my defensive walls instantly slamming back into place. "Excuse me? Why do you want to know that?" "Just answer the question," he demanded, his tone losing its rough edge and snapping back into that familiar, commanding authority. I narrowed my eyes, lifting my chin in defiance. "Yes, I live alone. In a tiny apartment far away from campus elites like you. And I vastly prefer it that way. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a class to get to." I didn't wait for his response. I shoved my locker shut and stormed down the hallway, my heart hammering a frantic, confused rhythm against my ribs. What was his problem? Why did he look at me like I was something he was desperately trying not to consume? Over the next few days, however, I realized that Kalen's strange behavior was only the tip of the iceberg. The entire dynamic of Etheria University had shifted, and I was somehow at the epicenter of the earthquake. The venomous whispers that had plagued me all week completely vanished. The alphas who had previously bumped into me in the halls or glared at me with predatory malice now actively parted like the Red Sea when I walked by. If I sat at a table in the library, a 10-foot radius around me suddenly became a ghost town. Even the snobby beta students in my biology lab stopped accidentally stealing my lab equipment. It was as if an invisible, impenetrable force field had been erected around me. I had gone from being a marked target to being completely, terrifyingly untouchable. I thought I was just getting lucky until Jasper cornered me in the student lounge on Friday afternoon. "Okay, you need to tell me what kind of dark magic you're using, because I am officially terrified of you," Jasper said, dropping onto the leather sofa next to me. He held 2 cups of cheap campus coffee, handing one to me with a trembling hand. "What are you talking about?" I asked, gratefully taking the caffeine. Jasper leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Don't play dumb with me, Orion. The word is out. The entire Alpha Council got a memo directly from Vance's inner circle. Kalen put out an absolute protection order on you." My coffee cup froze halfway to my mouth. "A what?" "A protection order," Jasper hissed, his amber eyes darting around to make sure no one was eavesdropping. "He declared you strictly off limits. Nobody touches you. Nobody speaks to you with disrespect. Nobody even looks at you wrong. The penalty for crossing you is facing Kalen himself. Do you have any idea what that means? You're practically campus royalty now, or his prized possession." A rush of cold dread, instantly followed by a surge of white-hot, blinding fury, erupted in my chest. Possession. The word echoed in my mind, triggering every traumatic memory of my childhood in the orphanage. I had spent my entire life fighting to be seen as a human being, not a fragile omega meant to be guarded, traded, or owned by an alpha or an enigma. I had explicitly told Kalen Vance that I belonged to no pack and no person. And what did he do? He arrogantly slapped an invisible barcode on my forehead without even having the decency to consult me. "I have to go," I snarled, slamming my half-full coffee cup onto the table. "Orion, wait. Where are you going?" Jasper called out, but I was already storming out of the lounge. I didn't have to search long. It was lunchtime, which meant Kalen was holding court in the main cafeteria. I pushed through the double doors, my vision practically swimming with rage. The cafeteria was massive, a sprawling sea of tables segregated by social status and dynamic. At the very center, on a slightly elevated platform that the school had ridiculously installed for student council meetings, sat Kalen. He was surrounded by his usual flock of admirers and high-ranking alphas, looking completely relaxed, eating a salad like he didn't have a care in the world. I didn't care about the hundreds of eyes on me. I didn't care about the sudden, deafening hush that fell over the massive room as I marched straight up the steps of the platform. The alphas sitting near him immediately tensed, some half standing to intercept me, but Kalen simply raised one hand, palm out. The alphas instantly sat back down, obedient as trained dogs. I stopped right in front of his table, slamming my hands flat onto the polished wood, leaning over him. "I don't need your protection," I said. My voice wasn't a shout, but in the dead silence of the cafeteria, it rang out like a gunshot. Kalen slowly lowered his fork. He didn't look angry. In fact, he looked frustratingly calm, as if he had been sitting there waiting for this exact confrontation. He met my furious glare with cool, steady gray eyes. "You don't have a choice in the matter," he replied smoothly, his voice carrying easily over the silent crowd. "You are on my campus. That makes your safety my responsibility. I am not your anything." I fired back, my voice trembling with the sheer force of my anger. "I am not a pet you can put a collar on. I am not some fragile little omega that needs a big, bad enigma to scare away the monsters. Call off the order, Vance. Now." A murmur of absolute shock rippled through the cafeteria. People were actually gasping. I had just publicly screamed at the king in his own castle. Kalen's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. The calm facade cracked, just a fraction, revealing a storm of dark, swirling intensity beneath. He slowly stood up, pushing his chair back. He towered over me, his broad shoulders easily blocking out the light from the massive windows behind him. The Enigma aura rolled off him in waves, thick and suffocating, pushing down on my shoulders, demanding my submission. I locked my knees, refusing to bow my head, refusing to look away, even as my instincts screamed in terror. He took a step closer, invading my personal space. "You think this is a game, Orion? You think I'm trying to own you? His voice was different now. It had dropped its theatrical volume, meant only for my ears. It was a dark, dangerous rumble that vibrated right through my bones. "That's exactly what you're doing," I whispered fiercely, my throat tight. "Why else would you do this? Why do you care what happens to me?" For an agonizingly long second, the rest of the world ceased to exist. It was just me and him, trapped in a bubble of impossible tension. I saw something flicker in his eyes, a flash of something raw, vulnerable, and completely terrifying. He leaned down, his lips brushing against the shell of my ear, sending a violent shiver down my spine. "Because," Kalen breathed, his voice laced with a quiet, desperate agony, "if they broke you, if someone on this campus hurt you because I didn't stop them, I wouldn't be able to forgive myself." Before I could even begin to process the devastating weight of that confession, Kalen pulled back. He didn't look at me again. He simply turned around, grabbed his bag, and walked off the platform, completely abandoning his lunch and his stunned followers, leaving me paralyzed in the center of the cafeteria, my heart beating so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. End of Part 3. Part 4. The words Kalen had whispered in the cafeteria replayed in my mind on an endless, torturous loop for the next 48 hours. If someone on this campus hurt you because I didn't stop them, I wouldn't be able to forgive myself. I lay on my worn-out mattress, staring up at the water-stained ceiling of my cramped apartment, completely unable to find even a moment of peace. My heart, which had always been a steady, reliable metronome dedicated entirely to my survival and my studies, was suddenly behaving like a wild, trapped bird every time his name crossed my mind. This wasn't supposed to happen. I had spent my entire life building impenetrable walls around myself, learning how to be invisible, how to be cold, and how to never, ever rely on the mercy of a dynamic higher than my own. Yet, Kalen Vance had somehow slipped right past my defenses without even throwing a punch. He was arrogant, commanding, and absolutely terrifying, but he had also shielded me when I was at my most vulnerable. He had wrapped me in his scent and his jacket when he could have easily destroyed my future with a single report to the dean. He was a walking contradiction, a beautiful, lethal puzzle that my treacherous Omega instincts were desperately begging me to solve. "You look like you're plotting a murder or having a minor breakdown. Possibly both." I blinked, forcefully pulled back to reality by Jasper's voice. We were sitting in the campus courtyard on a crisp Friday afternoon. The autumn leaves were painted in brilliant shades of crimson and gold, but I hadn't noticed any of it. I buried my face in my hands, letting out a long, exhausted groan. "I don't know what's happening to me, Jasper. I don't know what Kalen wants. One second he's throwing his Enigma weight around, treating me like a possession, and the next he's looking at me like I actually matter. Like I'm something precious. It makes no sense." Jasper took a slow sip of his iced tea, his amber eyes unusually serious. "Are you sure it makes no sense, Orion? Or are you just terrified of what it actually means? We barely know each other." I protested, dropping my hands. "We don't even like each other. Are you entirely sure about that last part?" Jasper asked quietly. When I couldn't formulate a response, he sighed and nudged my shoulder. "Look, sitting here and overthinking yourself into a coma isn't going to fix anything. You need a distraction. You need to get out of your own head, and tonight is the perfect opportunity." "No," I said instantly, already knowing where this was going. "The annual Etheria Gala," Jasper continued, completely ignoring my refusal. "It's the biggest social event of the semester. It's technically heavily skewed toward alphas and enigmas, but I managed to pull some strings and get us both on the guest list. You need to get out, Orion. You've been hiding in the shadows since the cafeteria incident. You need to show everyone, including Kalen Vance, that you aren't hiding." I wanted to argue. I wanted to list the 100 reasons why stepping into a ballroom filled with the most elite, power-hungry students on campus was a catastrophic idea. But Jasper had that stubborn, immovable glint in his eye. He wasn't going to let this go. And perhaps, deep down, a small, reckless part of me agreed with him. I was tired of hiding. 3 hours later, I found myself regretting that reckless part of my brain entirely. The venue was breathtaking, an opulent, historic ballroom located in the oldest wing of the university. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm, golden light over clusters of students dressed in designer suits and gowns that probably cost more than my entire tuition. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes, aged champagne, and the overwhelming, heavy pheromones of high-ranking alphas trying to outposture each other. I felt violently out of place. While everyone else was draped in silk and velvet, I was wearing a simple, fitted black button-down shirt and tailored trousers. It was the nicest outfit I owned, but in this sea of extreme wealth, I felt like a stray cat that had accidentally wandered into a royal court. True to form, Jasper abandoned me almost immediately. Within 10 minutes, he was swept away by a group of his alpha friends toward the bar, leaving me stranded near a towering marble pillar. I retreated into the deepest shadow I could find, nursing a glass of sparkling water and mentally counting down the exact number of minutes I had to stay before I could reasonably escape without Jasper guilt-tripping me for the next month. Then, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It was a palpable change, a sudden drop in the air pressure that made the hairs on my arms stand up. The low hum of 100 conversations faded out as the crowd naturally began to part, creating a wide, respectful pathway toward the small stage at the front of the ballroom. Kalen appeared. He moved through the sea of admirers with the effortless grace of a predator. He was wearing a midnight blue velvet suit that fit his broad shoulders so perfectly it looked sculpted. His dark hair was styled back, emphasizing the sharp, aristocratic lines of his jaw and cheekbones. He looked devastating. He commanded the absolute attention of every single person in the room without having to utter a single word. The sheer force of his enigma aura was suffocatingly powerful, a dark, intoxicating tide that washed over the crowd. He took the microphone on the stage with practiced ease, launching into a welcome speech about the university's legacy of leadership and excellence. His voice was a rich, dark baritone that echoed effortlessly through the massive hall. People leaned forward, practically hanging onto his every syllable as if he were revealing the secrets of the universe. I stayed hidden behind my pillar, watching him. I told myself I was just observing the spectacle. But then, as he spoke about the responsibilities of power, his storm-gray eyes swept over the massive crowd, and they locked instantly onto mine. Out of hundreds of people in that dimly lit room, his gaze found me in the shadows. The moment our eyes met, everything else simply ceased to exist. The elegant classical music playing softly from the hidden speakers, the clinking of champagne flutes, the whispers of the elite, all of it faded into absolute static. For several agonizing, breathless heartbeats, the entire world narrowed down to just the two of us. I watched, completely mesmerized, as Kalen's perfect, unbreakable rhythm faltered. Just for a second, he lost his train of thought. His jaw clenched, and he actually had to glance down at his note cards to recover his place in the speech. Nobody else in the adoring crowd seemed to notice the tiny slip, too caught up in their worship to see the crack in his flawless armor. But I saw it. I saw how my mere presence in the room had thrown off his ironclad control. When the speech finally concluded to thunderous applause, my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The invisible tether connecting us across the room was pulling so tightly I felt like I couldn't breathe. I had to leave. I had proven my point to Jasper, I had shown my face, and now I desperately needed the cool, empty air of the night to clear my head. I slipped away from the pillar, keeping my head down as I navigated toward the heavy oak exit doors at the back of the hall. I was almost free. I was 10 feet away from the exit when a large frame stepped directly into my path, completely blocking my escape route. It was Silas Thorne, a notorious alpha who played for the university's elite rugby team. He was built like a tank, and the heavy, sour stench of hard liquor wafted off him in nauseating waves. His eyes had that glassy, predatory look of an alpha who had consumed way too much alcohol and was actively looking for a target. Well, 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 Silas slurred, leaning in way too close. His rank, aggressive pine scent assaulted my senses, making my Omega biology recoil in sheer panic. If it isn't the little campus celebrity, the one everyone's whispering about, Vance's rumored little Omega pet. I took a sharp step backward, my pulse spiking. I'm not anyone's pet. Get out of my way. Silas let out a dark, ugly laugh. You're a feisty one, aren't you? No wonder the Enigma finds you entertaining. But rumors say he hasn't even claimed you yet. That means you're still fair game, right? Before I could even register his movement, Silas's hand shot out. His thick fingers wrapped around my wrist like an iron vice. His grip was brutal, agonizingly tight, meant to instantly assert dominance and force compliance. A sharp gasp of pain escaped my lips as he forcefully yanked me closer, invading my personal space entirely. Let go of me. I gritted out, struggling wildly against his hold. My heart was trapped in my throat, pure adrenaline and terror flooding my system. Why so hostile? Silas sneered, leaning his face down toward the crook of my neck, trying to catch my scent. I'm just trying to be friendly. Maybe I can show you what a real alpha. Silas's sentence was violently cut off. Suddenly, the suffocating grip on my wrist was ripped away with a sickening crack. Silas was physically thrown backward, stumbling over his own feet and crashing hard into a nearby cocktail table. Glasses shattered, spilling champagne across the polished floor. I gasped, stumbling back, clutching my bruised wrist to my chest. Kalen stood between us. I had never seen anything so terrifying in my entire life. Kalen's entire body was rigid with a fury so absolute, so catastrophic, that it was practically visible. His Enigma aura wasn't just leaking. It was exploding out of him in a violent, crushing shockwave that made every single Alpha and Beta in a 20-foot radius physically drop to their knees, choking on the oppressive pressure. His eyes were completely, entirely black, the human gray entirely swallowed by the feral, primal beast lurking beneath his skin. You touched him. Kalen's voice wasn't a shout. It was a low, demonic whisper that scraped against the walls of the ballroom, carrying more deadly promise than any scream ever could. Silas's alcohol-induced bravado evaporated in less than a second. He scrambled backward on the floor amidst the broken glass, his face entirely drained of blood, whining in pure, instinctual terror as his alpha biology completely submitted to the Enigma's wrath. "Vivance, I didn't know." Silas stammered frantically, holding his hands up. "I swear, I was just—" "Leave," Kalen commanded. The single word cracked through the air like a whip. It bypassed conscious thought, hitting Silas's primal instincts with the force of a freight train. "If I ever see you within 100 feet of him again, if you so much as breathe in his direction, I will tear you apart. Now run." Silas didn't need to be told twice. He practically crawled over himself to get to the doors, fleeing into the night as if the devil himself were chasing him. The ballroom was dead silent. The music had stopped. Hundreds of people were frozen in place, staring at the aftermath of Kalen's explosive rage. But Kalen didn't care about the audience. He didn't spare a single glance for the terrified crowd. The terrifying, pitch-black darkness in his eyes began to recede the exact second he turned around to face me. The suffocating Enigma pressure in the room vanished, replaced by an overwhelming wave of pure, concentrated protective warmth. He stepped toward me, his hands raised slightly, approaching me as if I were a wild, frightened animal that might bolt at any second. His eyes dropped to my chest, tracking my rapid, hyperventilating breaths, and then moved to my hand, where my fingers were still clamped protectively over my bruised wrist. Without saying a word, he gently, so impossibly gently, pried my fingers away. He cradled my injured wrist in his massive, warm hands. His thumb softly brushed over the reddening skin where Silas had grabbed me. "Come with me," he whispered softly, his voice rough with lingering adrenaline. He didn't wait for an answer. He laced his fingers delicately through mine, keeping me anchored to his side, and guided me away from the staring crowd. He pushed open a set of heavy glass doors, leading us out onto a private, secluded balcony overlooking the sprawling university grounds. The cool night air instantly hit my flushed skin, helping to clear the dizzying fog of panic from my brain. Kalen closed the doors behind us, muting the noise of the ballroom, leaving us completely isolated in the quiet dark. He didn't let go of my hand. He stood close, his chest rising and falling heavily. I could feel the heat radiating from him, could smell the sharp spike of distress in his cedarwood scent. "Are you hurt?" His voice was laced with a vulnerability I had never heard before. He looked down at my wrist again, his jaw clenching as if the sight caused him physical pain. "I'm fine," I whispered, though my voice trembled, betraying my shock. "He just grabbed me." You didn't have to do that in front of everyone." Kalen stepped even closer, his other hand coming up to gently cup the side of my face. His thumb traced my cheekbone, his touch so incredibly tender it made my heart ache. "This is exactly what I've been trying to prevent," Kalen said, his voice thick with emotion, his storm-gray eyes locking onto mine with desperate intensity. "Do you understand now, Orion? Do you understand why I can't just leave you alone? This world is cruel, and they will try to tear you down simply because you exist. This is why I need to make sure you are protected." I swallowed hard, fighting the overwhelming urge to lean into his warm palm. "I told you, Kalen. I am not your responsibility." "Yes, you are," he replied instantly, no hesitation in his voice. He stepped forward until our chests were almost touching, his Enigma presence enveloping me entirely, safe and absolute. "You don't understand it yet, Orion. But you are. You are mine to protect. And I will burn this entire university to the ground before I let anyone hurt you again." End of Part 4. Part 5. I did not sleep a single minute that night. I lay in my narrow bed, staring blankly at the water-stained ceiling of my apartment, my mind violently replaying every single second of what had happened on the balcony. The protective, catastrophic fury in Kalen's storm-gray eyes when he looked at Silas. The shocking, agonizingly gentle way his massive hands had cradled my bruised wrist. The way his voice had cracked, vibrating with a raw, desperate vulnerability when he told me he would burn the university down to keep me safe. I turned over, burying my face into my pillow, but I couldn't escape him. Even now, hours later, the phantom sensation of his thumb brushing against my cheekbone made my skin burn. My pulse raced, betraying the walls of logic and defense I had spent my entire life building. I was terrified, not of him, but of the terrifying realization dawning in the darkest corners of my mind. I was starting to let him in. I had survived my cruel childhood by learning a fundamental, unshakable rule. Never trust anyone with more power than you, and never, ever rely on an alpha or an enigma for salvation. They always wanted a price. But Kalen Vance was systematically dismantling every belief I held. He hadn't asked for anything. He hadn't demanded my submission. He had simply wrapped himself around my fragile existence like an impenetrable fortress, demanding nothing but my safety. And the most dangerous part, my treacherous Omega biology was beginning to sing in his presence, craving his dark cedarwood and rain scent with a hunger that scared me to death. Morning came, bringing with it a shockwave that ripped through the very foundations of Etheria University. I had barely stepped onto the main quad when I felt the chaotic energy buzzing in the air. Students were huddled in tight groups, their phones out, voices hushed but frantic. Jasper found me near the grand fountain, his amber eyes wide, practically vibrating with disbelief. "Have you checked the student portal?" Jasper gasped, grabbing my arm and pulling me out of the main pathway. "No, my phone died," I said, a pit of anxiety instantly forming in my stomach. "Jasper, what happened?" "Silas Thorne," Jasper breathed out, his voice laced with awe and a healthy dose of fear. "He's gone, Orion. Not just suspended. Expelled. The official statement said it was for gross misconduct and violation of the Etheria Code. But the rumor mill is going absolutely insane. Apparently, Kalen's lawyers contacted the university board at 2 in the morning. They didn't just kick Silas out. They blacklisted his entire family from university affiliations. Silas's athletic career is completely dead. He packed his bags and left campus before sunrise. I stared at Jasper, my mind blanking out. Expelled. Blacklisted. Ruined. In the span of a few hours, Kalen had completely obliterated a high-ranking alpha's life without breaking a sweat, all because Silas had grabbed my wrist. I should have been furious. I should have been outraged by the blatant display of untouchable privilege and Kalen's arrogant interference in my life. I had explicitly told him I wasn't his responsibility. But as I stood there in the chilly autumn air, a terrifyingly warm, heavy wave of relief washed over me. For the first time in my life, someone had fought for me. Someone had looked at the monsters in my world and decided to destroy them on my behalf. But I couldn't let him think he owned me. I couldn't lose my autonomy. I left Jasper standing by the fountain and tore across the campus. I knew exactly where to find him. It was a Tuesday, which meant Kalen had an advanced theoretical physics seminar in the old science wing. I paced outside the heavy oak doors of the lecture hall, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs until the bell finally rang. Students began to pour out, parting like the Red Sea the moment they saw me standing there. I was Kalen Vance's untouchable Omega now. Nobody dared to even look me in the eye. Finally, Kalen emerged. He looked immaculate in a dark charcoal sweater that highlighted his broad chest, his expression cool and detached. But the exact second his gray eyes locked onto mine, that mask vanished. He stopped dead in his tracks, his posture shifting, instantly zeroing in on me. Without giving myself a second to hesitate, or giving him a chance to speak, I marched forward, grabbed the fabric of his sleeve, and yanked him toward the nearest empty classroom. A collective gasp echoed in the hallway. I had just grabbed the campus enigma like he was a misbehaving child. But Kalen didn't resist. He followed me effortlessly, his massive frame slipping into the empty chemistry lab behind me. I slammed the door shut, hitting the lock, enclosing us in the quiet, sterile space. "You got Silas expelled," I said, not bothering to phrase it as a question. I spun around to face him, my chest heaving. "You destroyed his entire life." Kalen leaned casually against the edge of a black laboratory desk, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked completely unbothered by my accusatory tone. In fact, his eyes dropped immediately to my wrist, checking to make sure it wasn't bruised. "Yes," Kalen answered simply, his dark velvet voice carrying a chilling finality. "Is that a problem, Orion?" "Yes, it's a problem," I practically shouted, the days of confusion and suppressed emotion finally boiling over. You can't just play God with everyone on this campus. You can't just control every single aspect of my life. I told you I didn't want your interference. And I told you that your safety is my priority, Kalen fired back, his demeanor shifting. He pushed off the desk, taking a slow, deliberate step toward me. The air in the lab grew heavy, charged with his Enigma dominance, but he kept it tightly leashed, ensuring he didn't suffocate me. You think this is about control? You think I enjoy having to watch you constantly, terrified that some arrogant alpha is going to lay their hands on you? If I don't protect you, you won't be safe. This campus is full of predators, Orion. I have survived predators my entire life. I screamed back, my voice cracking, all my carefully maintained composure crumbling into dust. I didn't back away as he approached. I tilted my chin up, glaring into his intense gray eyes. I don't need you to be my savior. I just want to understand. Why me? Out of everyone in this entire elite university, why are you doing this? Why do you care so much about what happens to me? Kalen went completely, frighteningly still. His hands, which had been relaxed at his sides, slowly curled into tight fists. The silence that stretched between us was deafening, thick with the weight of unspoken, world-shattering truths. I watched the battle raging behind his eyes, the Enigma instinct warring with a deeply human, desperate fear. When he finally spoke, his voice was completely stripped of its usual arrogance. It was raw, guttural, and carried a profound, aching vulnerability that knocked the breath completely out of my lungs. Because you're my fated mate, Orion. The world simply stopped spinning. The sterile hum of the fluorescent lights above us vanished. The blood roared in my ears like a rushing waterfall, completely short-circuiting my brain's ability to process language. Fated mates. The concept was a myth. A biological fairy tale told to Omegas to make them believe in happily ever afters. It was the stuff of cheap romance novels and ancient lore. The idea that two souls were biologically, fundamentally designed for each other by the universe itself. It wasn't real life. It certainly wasn't my life. I whispered, taking a stumbling step backward until my spine hit the cold glass of a fume hood. That's impossible. That's not real. It is real. It's reality. Kalen took a step toward me, his hand reaching out instinctively, but he forced himself to stop, clearly terrified of spooking me further. That afternoon in the library, when your scent blockers failed. The second I breathed you in, my entire biological makeup recognized you. Enigmas don't just like people, Orion. Our instincts are violently absolute. Everything in my blood, my soul, my Enigma nature, it all knows that you belong with me. You are the other half of my soul. My heart was racing so fast I felt genuinely dizzy. Black spots danced at the edge of my vision. No. I shook my head frantically, my breathing shallow. No, no, no. I don't want this. I don't want to be bound to anyone. I don't want. I know, Kalen cut me off, but his tone wasn't cruel. It was devastatingly gentle, carrying a heartbreaking level of understanding. I know you don't want me. You probably hate me for what I am. And I swear to you, Orion, I am not going to force you into anything. That's not what this is about. I don't want to own you. I just want to love you. The confession hit me like a physical blow. The most terrifying, ruthless enigma on campus was standing before me, stripping away all his armor, practically begging me to understand his agony. But I can't change the truth of what we are, Kalen continued, his voice thick with unshed emotion. That's why I tried to stay away from you. I tried to give you space. But every time you're in danger, every time someone looks at you with disrespect, my enigma side loses its mind. I am biologically wired to tear the world apart to keep you safe. I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up entirely, choked by a violent storm of emotions I didn't know how to navigate. Fear, confusion, anger, they all raged inside me. But underneath the panic, buried deep in my chest, was something else. A terrifying, undeniable warmth. My Omega biology was practically weeping with joy, recognizing the truth in his words, recognizing its ultimate protector. But my rational mind, heavily scarred by years of trauma, completely panicked. Without saying another word, without giving him a chance to explain further, I bolted. I shoved past him, threw open the heavy door of the chemistry lab, and ran. I ran from Kalen Vance, from his impossible confession, from the terrifying reality of destiny. I sprinted down the hallways, ignoring the shouts of surprised students, not stopping until I was miles off campus, pounding on Jasper's apartment door like my life depended on it. When Jasper finally opened the door, a gaming headset around his neck and a confused smile on his face, I completely broke down. I fell into his tiny apartment, gasping for air, the tears I had been fiercely holding back finally spilling over. Orion, what's wrong? What happened? Jasper grabbed my shoulders, his face pale with concern. Everything spilled out of me in a chaotic, hysterical rush. The confrontation, Silas, the confession, the fated mate revelation. My complete, utter inability to process the fact that the campus enigma wasn't just obsessed with me. He was destined for me. Jasper pulled me onto his worn-out couch, listening to the entire story without interrupting, without judging my panic. When I finally ran out of words, sobbing quietly into my hands, the room fell silent. So, fated mates are actually real, Jasper whispered in absolute awe. I always thought that was just a bedtime story they told us. It ruins everything, Jasper, I cried, wiping my face in frustration. What am I supposed to do? I don't know him. He's an enigma. He's everything I've spent my life running away from. Jasper sat down beside me, wrapping a warm, comforting arm around my shaking shoulders. Is he, Orion? Think about it. He's powerful, yes. He's terrifying, definitely. But he hasn't hurt you. In fact, he's done the exact opposite. He protected you when your blockers failed. He shielded you from Silas. He gave you a choice when his biology is probably screaming at him to just claim you and be done with it. Jasper tilted my head up, forcing me to look at him. His amber eyes were incredibly soft, carrying a wisdom I desperately needed. Listen to what your heart is telling you, Orion, Jasper said quietly. Not the traumatized kid from the orphanage. Not the defensive Omega. Listen to your heart. Does it really want to run away from him? And as I sat there in the quiet apartment, the scent of dark cedarwood and rain still faintly clinging to my clothes, I realized the most terrifying truth of all. No, it didn't. End of Part 5. Part 6. That night, alone in the suffocating silence of my cramped apartment, I stared at the glowing screen of my phone for a solid hour. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly. Jasper's words kept echoing in my mind, fighting a relentless war against my deeply ingrained survival instincts. Listen to your heart. Does it really want to run away from him? The truth terrified me more than the enigma himself ever could, because the answer was no. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to steady my racing pulse, and finally typed out a single, fragile message to the number Kalen had slipped into my bag weeks ago. I need time. Please. I just need time to think about everything. I hit send and immediately tossed the phone onto my mattress, burying my face in my hands, bracing myself for his reaction. Would he be angry? Would his enigma pride demand immediate submission? Would he show up at my door and shatter the last remaining pieces of my defensive walls? My phone buzzed against the worn blanket, less than 5 seconds later. I reached out blindly, pulling the screen into view. Take all the time you need, Orion. I'm not going anywhere. Whenever you're ready, I'll be here. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. He wasn't pushing. He wasn't demanding. The most powerful, untouchable force on this campus had just knelt at the gates of my walls and promised to wait in the rain until I was ready to open the door. I set the phone aside, staring up at the water-stained ceiling, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt the terrifying, beautiful sensation of feeling truly safe. 2 weeks passed in a strange, suspended sort of limbo. Kalen kept his promise with a rigorous, almost agonizing dedication. He gave me the space I had begged for. I still saw him around campus, of course. Etheria University wasn't big enough to completely avoid a man who practically owned it. I saw him in the lecture halls, in the shadowy corners of the library, sitting across the vast expanse of the cafeteria. But he never approached me. He maintained a physical distance, though the invisible, magnetic tether between us never broke. I could feel his heavy, storm-gray eyes on me constantly. He was always watching, always silently ensuring my path was clear, that no arrogant alpha dared to even breathe in my direction. He was my silent, untouchable guardian angel disguised as a ruthless enigma. And somewhere during those 14 days of excruciating silence, something fundamental shifted inside me. I started noticing Kalen's absence more than his terrifying presence. When I sat alone in the library, I found myself instinctively turning my head, hoping to catch a glimpse of his dark silhouette against the bookshelves. I missed the suffocating, grounding weight of his cedarwood and rain scent. I missed the way his jaw would clench when someone looked at me too long. I even missed his infuriating habit of appearing out of nowhere just to aggravate me. The realization didn't hit me all at once. It crept up on me slowly, like the rising tide, until I was completely submerged. It wasn't just my Omega biology desperately responding to an enigma's call. It wasn't just the fated mate Bond pulling my strings like a puppet. It was me, Orion. The traumatized, fiercely independent scholarship student had completely, irreversibly fallen in love with Kalen Vance. I loved the human behind the terrifying mask. I loved the man who had destroyed his own reputation just to wrap his jacket around my shivering shoulders. I was in love with him, and I was finally brave enough to admit it. I decided I was going to tell him on a Friday night. I had stayed late at the campus library, drafting the conversation in my head 1,000 times over until my brain felt like mush. The autumn air had turned bitterly cold, a heavy, freezing fog rolling in off the nearby river as I made my way home through the quieter, dimly lit streets on the edge of the university grounds. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long, eerie shadows on the damp pavement. I pulled my scarf tighter around my neck, my mind completely consumed by thoughts of Kalen. I was so distracted by my own racing heart that I didn't hear the danger until it was almost entirely too late. The screech of tires ripping against wet asphalt tore through the quiet night. I froze, my head snapping to the left. A sleek, black sports car was barreling down the narrow street, completely ignoring the red light at the intersection. It was moving at a terrifying speed, hydroplaning on the damp road, and it was heading directly toward the crosswalk. Directly toward me. The blinding glare of the headlights washed over me, pinning me in place like a deer in the crosshairs. My muscles locked up in pure, paralyzing terror. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My mind just registered the blinding light and the deafening roar of the engine. This is it, my brain supplied numbly. Then, the world exploded. A massive, incredibly powerful force slammed into me from the right side. The impact completely knocked the air from my lungs, lifting me entirely off my feet, just a fraction of a second before the sports car tore through the exact spot I had been standing. We hit the hard, unforgiving pavement violently, rolling several times across the rough concrete. But I didn't feel the devastating scrape of the road. I was completely encased. A large, muscular body had wrapped around me entirely, taking the full, brutal brunt of the impact, shielding my head and spine from the concrete with his own flesh and bone. We finally skidded to a halt in the damp gutter, my ears ringing violently from the noise of the speeding car fading off into the distance. Orion. The voice was frantic, completely stripped of any composure. Large, trembling hands were instantly running over my arms, my shoulders, my face, frantically checking for broken bones. Orion, answer me. Please. Are you hurt? I gasped, my lungs finally remembering how to pull in oxygen. I opened my eyes, blinking through the dizzying fog of adrenaline, and saw Kalen hovering over me. His storm gray eyes were blown wide with absolute, unadulterated terror. He looked completely feral, his enigma aura thrashing wildly in the air around us, a storm of panic and rage. I'm okay. I choked out, my hands instinctively reaching up to grip the front of his torn shirt. I'm fine. Kalen, I'm fine. He let out a ragged, broken exhale, dropping his forehead against my shoulder for a second. His chest was heaving against mine. Thank God, he whispered, his voice trembling. But as he pushed himself up slightly to look at me again, the sickly yellow glow of the street lamp illuminated the side of his body. My heart stopped dead in my chest. Kalen, you're bleeding. I gasped, all my previous fear instantly transferring to him. His dark sweater was ripped to shreds along his left arm, the fabric soaked with dark, heavy blood. The skin beneath was scraped raw and deep from the pavement. There was a jagged cut along his cheekbone, bleeding steadily down his jaw, and he was holding his left shoulder at a stiff, unnatural angle. He had thrown himself between a speeding car and the concrete to save my life. It's nothing, Kalen dismissed instantly, his eyes still frantically scanning my face. I heal fast. We need to get you checked out. We're going to the hospital. You are bleeding everywhere. I interrupted, pushing myself up to a sitting position. A fierce, protective surge of adrenaline flooded my system. We're not going to a hospital where they'll ask a million questions about the Enigma heir getting into a street fight with a car. My apartment is 2 blocks away. You are coming with me, and I am cleaning those wounds. Kalen looked stunned by my sudden, commanding tone. The feral panic in his eyes dialed back just a fraction, replaced by a flicker of surprised awe. He opened his mouth to argue, to insist on prioritizing me, but I didn't give him the chance. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the stinging in my bruised knees, and grabbed his uninjured right arm. I pulled him up with far more force than my Omega frame should have possessed. My apartment. Now, I demanded. He didn't argue again. He just let out a soft, breathy chuckle that sounded more like a wince, and let me support a fraction of his heavy weight as we limped the remaining 2 blocks to my building. My apartment was tiny, drafty, and completely unimpressive. It was a stark contrast to the opulent, billionaire lifestyle I knew Kalen was accustomed to. But as I practically pushed him onto my worn-out, faded sofa, he didn't even glance around. His eyes never left my face. I ran to my cramped bathroom, grabbing my first aid kit, a bowl of warm water, and clean towels. When I returned to the living room, my hands were shaking so violently I almost dropped the plastic kit. "Take the sweater off," I instructed, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to sound authoritative. Kalen complied, wincing slightly as he navigated his injured shoulder. When the ruined fabric fell away, I sucked in a sharp breath. His torso was sculpted, heavily muscled perfection, but the entire left side of his arm and shoulder was a mess of deep abrasions, already swelling and bruising a dark, angry purple. I sat down on the edge of the coffee table, directly between his parted knees. The proximity was overwhelming. I was trapped within the heavy, intoxicating cloud of his cedarwood scent, completely surrounded by his warmth. I dipped a cotton cloth into the antiseptic water and gently pressed it to the deep scrape on his bicep. I expected him to flinch or pull away, but he remained perfectly, impossibly still. He just watched me. "Thank you," Kalen said softly, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. I scrubbed the wound a little harder than necessary, fighting the sudden burn of tears in my eyes. "Don't thank me. You got hurt because of me. You could have been killed, Kalen." My voice cracked on his name, thick with all the emotions I had been suppressing for 2 weeks. Suddenly, Kalen's uninjured hand came up. His large fingers gently wrapped around my wrist, stopping my frantic cleaning motions. "No," he said, his voice firm, carrying absolute conviction. "I got hurt because I chose to protect you. And I would make that exact same choice 1,000 times over, Orion. I would throw myself in front of a train if it meant keeping you safe. Your safety means everything to me." A tear slipped free, tracing a hot path down my cheek. I looked up, meeting his intense, faded gaze. The walls I had spent my life building finally, completely shattered into dust. "Why?" I whispered, my voice breaking completely. "Why would you do all of this for me?" He shifted closer, his hand sliding from my wrist to gently cup the side of my face. His thumb brushed away my tear. "Because you are the most important person in my entire world, Orion," Kalen murmured, his eyes shining with a profound, terrifying vulnerability. "Fated mate biology or not, that wouldn't change how I feel about you. I have been in love with you since the first day, when you looked me dead in the eye and called me entitled. You were the first person who ever saw me, not just the Enigma mask. I love you." I squeezed my eyes shut as a sob finally broke free from my throat. I dropped the bloody cloth, bringing both of my hands up to clutch his face. I didn't care about the blood, I didn't care about the danger, and I didn't care about the fear anymore. "I love you too," I sobbed, opening my eyes to look at him. "I love you, Kalen." The breath completely left his lungs. Before I could process the shock on his face, his uninjured arm wrapped tightly around my waist, pulling me off the coffee table and directly onto his lap. I buried my face into the crook of his uninjured neck, wrapping my arms tightly around his broad shoulders. He held me as if I were the most precious, fragile thing in the universe, pressing his face into my hair, breathing in my scent like it was the only oxygen left on Earth. In his strong, protective embrace, the terrifying noise of the world completely vanished. I finally understood. I wasn't surrendering to an enigma, and I wasn't submitting to destiny. I was choosing him. I was choosing Kalen, just as completely and fiercely as he had chosen me. End of Part 6. Part 7. The tiny, drafty living room of my apartment had never felt so entirely isolated from the rest of the world. The distant wail of a city siren and the faint patter of autumn rain against the thin glass of my window were the only reminders that a universe existed outside these 4 walls. But in that moment, wrapped securely in Kalen Vance's arms, the rest of the world could have burned to ash, and I wouldn't have cared. I stayed buried against his chest for a long time, letting the rhythmic, heavy thud of his heartbeat ground me. The intoxicating scent of dark cedarwood and rain was slowly beginning to mix with my own sweet, jasmine omega scent, creating a warm, heavy atmosphere in the room that felt undeniably like home. My frantic biology, which had spent weeks screaming at me to run, finally settled into a state of absolute, euphoric peace. Eventually, the reality of his injuries gently pulled me back to the present. I pulled away just enough to look at his face, my hands coming up to cup his jaw, careful to avoid the jagged cut on his cheekbone. We need to finish cleaning these up, I murmured, my voice still thick with emotion. I managed a watery smile. As much as I love holding you, letting an enigma bleed out on my thrift store sofa isn't exactly the romantic evening I had in mind. Kalen let out a low, rumbling chuckle that vibrated straight through my palms. The storm gray of his eyes had completely softened, melting into a liquid, adoring silver that made my breath catch all over again. He leaned into my touch, pressing an impossibly gentle kiss to the inside of my wrist. "You're the boss, Orion," he whispered. I grabbed the discarded cotton cloth, dipped it back into the warm, antiseptic water, and carefully resumed my work. This time, the silence between us wasn't thick with tension or unspoken fears. It was comfortable. It was profoundly intimate. As I cleaned the deep abrasions on his shoulder, applying a soothing layer of medical ointment, Kalen's uninjured arm remained wrapped firmly around my waist. His thumb traced idle, soothing circles against my hip bone, a silent, continuous reassurance that he was right here, that he was mine. When I finally finished bandaging the worst of the scrapes and placed a small butterfly bandage over the cut on his cheek, I leaned back, inspecting my work. He looked like he had gone 10 rounds in an underground fighting ring, but he also looked devastatingly beautiful. "There," I said softly, packing the supplies back into the plastic kit. "You're going to be sore tomorrow, but you'll live." "Come here," Kalen demanded softly. He didn't wait for me to comply. He reached out, grabbing my waist and pulling me back down against his chest, mindful of his injured shoulder. He maneuvered us until we were lying horizontally on the small sofa, my back pressed flush against the cushions, his large frame caging me in, blanketing me in his warmth. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, taking a deep, shuddering breath of my unfiltered scent. I felt the slight scrape of his stubble against my sensitive skin, sending a shower of sparks down my spine. My fingers instinctively pushed into his dark, thick hair, holding him close. "Stay with me tonight," I whispered into the quiet room. It wasn't a question, it was a plea. "Try and make me leave," he murmured against my skin, his breath hot and comforting. "I'm never letting you out of my sight again, Orion." We fell asleep like that, tangled together on a sofa that was entirely too small for an enigma. For the first time since I was a child, I didn't have a single nightmare. I didn't dream of the cold orphanage, or the cruel alphas, or the suffocating feeling of being hunted. I just dreamed of silver eyes and the smell of rain. The next morning broke with a crisp, pale sunlight streaming through the blinds. I woke up slowly, feeling completely immobilized by a heavy, incredibly warm weight. I blinked my eyes open, shifting slightly, and found Kalen staring down at me. He had clearly been awake for a while, his head propped up on his uninjured arm, just watching me sleep. "Good morning," I mumbled, my voice rough with sleep, a blush instantly heating my cheeks under his intense, adoring gaze. "Good morning, my beautiful Omega," Kalen replied, his voice a dark, morning gravel rasp that sent a shiver straight to my core. He leaned down, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to my forehead, then the tip of my nose, and finally my lips. It was slow, reverent, and tasted entirely like a promise. The reality of the situation washed over me, but instead of the panic I had expected, I only felt a deep, unwavering resolve. We were really doing this. The campus outcast and the untouchable king. Later that morning, after I had forcibly made Kalen drink a cup of terrible instant coffee, which he choked down without a single complaint just to make me smile, we walked to campus together. Before we reached the main gates, I told him I needed to find Jasper. I found my best friend sitting in our usual spot in the student lounge, aggressively typing on his laptop. When he looked up and saw me, his eyes widened. Then, his gaze shifted slightly over my shoulder, and his jaw practically unhinged. I didn't have to look back to know Kalen was standing exactly 3 feet behind me, a massive, silent shadow, radiating an enigma aura that screamed mine to anyone who dared to look too closely. "Jasper," I started, suddenly feeling incredibly shy. I wrung my hands together. We. Jasper looked from me, blushing furiously, to Kalen, who was staring down at the beta with a look of cool, terrifying assessment. Then a massive, knowing grin broke across Jasper's face. He slammed his laptop shut and leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Finally," Jasper laughed, shaking his head. "Sweet mother of all that is holy, I was getting so incredibly tired of watching you two aggressively brood and dance around each other." The sexual tension was practically a fire hazard for the entire university. "Jasper," I gasped, my face burning as red as a tomato. Behind me, Kalen let out a low, rumbling laugh. He stepped forward, closing the distance between us, and effortlessly wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling my back flush against his chest. He rested his chin on the top of my head, looking at Jasper. "He's right, you know," Kalen said smoothly, his enigma presence dialing back into something warm and pleased. "You were very stubborn, Orion." "Oh, shut up," I muttered, but I leaned back into his solid embrace, a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "Well, congratulations," Jasper beamed, standing up and packing his bag. "But I highly suggest you brace yourselves. The rumor mill has been completely dead since Silas got expelled, but the second you two step out into the main quad holding hands, the entire university is going to absolutely implode." Jasper wasn't exaggerating. When Kalen and I walked out of the student lounge and stepped into the sprawling, crowded space of the main quad, the reaction was instantaneous, and it was entirely explosive. The low hum of hundreds of conversations didn't just fade, it hit a brick wall. People literally stopped dead in their tracks. Textbooks slipped from hands. Coffee spilled onto the cobblestones. Every single pair of eyes on campus snapped toward us, widening in absolute, unadulterated shock. Kalen didn't flinch. His posture was impeccable, his face set in that mask of cold, untouchable aristocratic authority that he wore so well. But his actions told a completely different story. He didn't just walk beside me. As we stepped into the center of the quad, Kalen shifted his hand, lacing his long fingers perfectly through mine. He lifted our joined hands slightly, making sure every single alpha, beta, and omega in the vicinity saw it. Then, he flared his enigma aura. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't the suffocating, crushing wave of dominance he had used on Silas. This was a claim. A heavy, dark, and incredibly potent wave of cedarwood and rain rolled across the courtyard, completely entwined with the sweet, unmistakable scent of my jasmine. He was broadcasting to the entire world, on a biological level, that our scents were mingled. He was declaring that I was his fated mate, his chosen equal, and completely, undeniably under his absolute protection. The alphas in the crowd immediately lowered their heads, baring their necks in a primal show of submission to the Enigma's claim. The betas hurriedly stepped out of our path, clearing a massive, 10-foot-wide walkway for us to pass through. I kept my chin high, gripping Kalen's hand back just as tightly. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't out of fear. It was out of pride. For the first time in my life, I wasn't hiding in an oversized hoodie. I wasn't making myself small. I was walking through the center of Etheria University alongside the most powerful man in the world, and I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that no one would ever dare to hurt me again. "You okay?" Kalen murmured, leaning down slightly so only I could hear his deep voice. "Never better," I whispered back, shooting him a blinding smile. We made it all the way to the steps of the main administrative building, basking in the stunned silence of the student body, when the illusion of our perfect victory was suddenly shattered. Waiting at the top of the marble steps were three men. They weren't students. They wore immaculate, tailored charcoal suits, earpieces, and sunglasses, looking like they had stepped straight out of a covert military operation. Standing in front of them was an older alpha with silver hair at his temples and a face carved from granite. He shared Kalen's sharp jawline and storm-cloud eyes, though his were significantly colder. I felt Kalen's entire body instantly go rigid. The warm, protective aura wrapping around me completely vanished, replaced by a violent, freezing wall of defensive hostility. His grip on my hand tightened to the point of pain, and a low, terrifying growl actually ripped its way out of Kalen's throat. "Father!" Kalen spat the word like it was a deadly poison. Marcus Vance, the patriarch of the Vance dynasty and one of the most ruthless enigmas in the country, looked down at our joined hands with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Kalen," Marcus's voice was a chilling boom that echoed across the stone courtyard. "We need to talk. Now, the board has been informed of your little indiscretion, and the Vance family does not accept charity case Omegas into its bloodline." My blood ran ice cold. The fairy tale was over. The real war had just begun. End of Part 7. Part 8. The air in the quad didn't just turn cold. It crystallized into jagged shards of pure, suffocating ice. Marcus Vance didn't need to raise his voice or make any sudden, threatening movements. He simply stood at the top of the marble stairs, looking down at us with the absolute, devastating arrogance of a man who owned the world and everyone in it. His enigma aura was vastly different from Kalen's. While Kalen's presence felt like a heavy, dark storm rolling over a forest, his father's aura was like an industrial press, cold, metallic, and designed to crush anything that dared to stand in its way without a single ounce of mercy. I felt the pressure hit me like a physical blow to the chest. My knees instantly buckled under the agonizing weight of the elder Enigma's dominance. The terrified Omega instincts inside me screamed to hit the ground, to bare my neck, to surrender completely to the apex predator in the room. But before my knees could even touch the cobblestones, Kalen moved. He stepped entirely in front of me, using his massive frame as a physical shield. He didn't just flare his aura to protect me. He unleashed a catastrophic, feral explosion of power. The scent of crushed cedarwood and dark rain turned sharp, acidic, and violently hostile. It collided with his father's metallic pressure in midair, creating an invisible shockwave that actually made the glass panes in the administrative building rattle. Several students in the crowd let out terrified whimpers, dropping to their knees, unable to withstand the crossfire of two enigmas going to war. "Do not speak about him like that," Kalen growled. The sound didn't even sound human. It was a guttural, demonic vibration that tore from the deepest depths of his chest. His storm gray eyes had gone completely, terrifyingly black. "Take that aura down right now, Marcus, or I swear to God I will tear your throat out on these steps." Marcus didn't flinch, but his eyes narrowed imperceptibly. He recognized the absolute, unhinged lethality in his son's voice. Kalen wasn't making a threat. He was stating a biological fact. An enigma pushed to protect their fated mate had no concept of family, law, or restraint. They only knew survival and slaughter. Slowly, agonizingly, the elder Vance dialed back his crushing pressure, though his expression remained a mask of pure disdain. "You are making a public spectacle of yourself, Kalen," Marcus said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Over what? A fleeting obsession with a broken, lower-class Omega? The Vance bloodline requires strength, pedigree, and perfection, not a charity case plucked from a miserable orphanage. The board of directors is already drafting the paperwork. By noon today, his scholarship will be completely revoked. He will be expelled from Etheria University, and he will be thrown right back into the gutter where he belongs." My heart stopped. The words sliced through my chest like a heated blade. Revoked. Expelled. Everything I had bled for, every sleepless night, every tear I had shed to build a future for myself, gone in a single sentence. This was exactly what I had always feared. This was why I had built my wall so high. Power always won. "If you touch his scholarship," Kalen's voice was deathly quiet, carrying a horrific calm that was far more terrifying than his rage. "If you so much as look at his academic records, I will dissolve the Vance Corporation." Marcus let out a short, mocking laugh. "You are an heir, Kalen. You do not have the power to dissolve a multi-billion-dollar empire." "No, I don't," Kalen agreed, his black eyes practically burning a hole through his father's skull. "But I do have the private ledger, the offshore accounts, the illegal alpha suppression protocols the company funded in the global south. I have every single piece of dirt you've buried for the last 20 years safely secured on a dead man's switch. You pull his scholarship, and I send the entire decrypted drive to the feds, the international press, and your worst corporate rivals." A deathly silence fell over the courtyard. Marcus Vance's face drained of color. The untouchable patriarch actually took a half-step backward, the flawless mask of control finally cracking to reveal genuine, unadulterated panic. He stared at his son as if he were looking at a stranger. "You would burn your own legacy to the ground?" Marcus whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You would destroy your own inheritance, your own name, for a single Omega?" Kalen didn't hesitate for even a fraction of a second. "He is my fated mate. He is my legacy. The Vance name means absolutely nothing to me without him." The sheer magnitude of Kalen's devotion hit me so hard my breath hitched. He was willing to throw away an entire empire, billions of dollars, and his own bloodline just to ensure I was safe. He was burning the world down just to keep me warm. But I couldn't let him do it alone. I couldn't stand behind him like a helpless, fragile prize while he fought my battles. I wasn't that scared little kid in the orphanage anymore. I was Orion, and I was the fated mate of the most powerful enigma on this campus. I took a deep breath, fighting through the lingering terror in my veins, and stepped out from behind Kalen's broad back. Kalen instantly reached for me, a flash of panic crossing his features, but I caught his hand and laced my fingers tightly with his. I squeezed his hand, a silent promise that I wasn't running. Then, I looked up the marble steps, locking my gaze directly onto Marcus Vance. "You can take my scholarship," I said. My voice wasn't as loud or as booming as an enigma's, but in the dead silence of the quad, it rang out clear as a bell, steady and completely devoid of fear. "You can take my degree. You can use your money and your power to try and ruin my life. But you will never, ever take him from me." Marcus sneered, looking at me like I was an insect. You have no power here, boy. You are nothing. You're right, I replied, lifting my chin, refusing to break eye contact. I don't have money. I don't have a prestigious last name. I don't have a board of directors to do my dirty work. But I have him. And unlike you, I didn't have to force him to stand by my side using threats and manipulation. He chose me, and I am choosing him. I looked at the older Enigma, pouring every ounce of the fierce, unyielding survival instinct I had honed over my entire life into my gaze. If you expel me, Kalen leaves with me. If you cut him off, we build a new life together. You think my background makes me weak? It makes me unbreakable. I know how to survive with nothing. Do you? Because if you push this, Kalen will pull that trigger, and you will lose everything. The choice is yours, Mr. Vance. The crowd was completely breathless. Even the security guard standing behind Marcus looked visibly shocked. And Omega, a scholarship student with no pack and no backing, was publicly backing down the most feared enigma in the country. Marcus stared at me for a long, agonizing minute. I could see the gears turning in his head, calculating the risks, weighing the sheer, feral determination in Kalen's eyes against his own corporate greed. He realized, with a sickening clarity, that he had lost. You cannot negotiate with an enigma when it comes to their mate. Marcus's jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might shatter. He adjusted the cuffs of his expensive suit, a pathetic attempt to regain some semblance of dignity. You are a fool, Kalen, Marcus spat, his voice vibrating with venom. You have officially alienated yourself from this family. Do not ever expect a dime of my money, or an ounce of my protection, ever again. You are on your own. I have everything I need right here, Kalen replied coldly, tightening his grip on my hand. Marcus didn't say another word. He turned on his heel, gesturing sharply to his security detail, and marched back into the administrative building, the heavy glass doors slamming shut behind him, signaling the end of his reign of terror over our lives. The moment he disappeared from sight, the suffocating tension in the courtyard shattered. Kalen instantly turned to me, dropping his defensive posture completely. His large hands came up to frame my face, his thumbs gently sweeping over my cheekbones, his storm-gray eyes frantically searching mine for any sign of lingering fear or regret. Are you okay? He whispered, his voice trembling slightly with adrenaline. Did he hurt you? Orion, I swear, if he... I'm fine, I interrupted softly, covering his massive hands with my own. I looked up at him, a watery, brilliant smile breaking across my face. I've never been better. Kalen let out a sound that was half-laugh, half-sob. He didn't care that there were still hundreds of students staring at us. He didn't care that we were standing in the middle of the main quad. He wrapped his arms around my waist, pulled me flush against his chest, and crashed his lips down onto mine. The kiss was everything. It was desperate, passionate, and overwhelmingly tender all at once. It tasted like rain and adrenaline and absolute victory. I melted against him, wrapping my arms around his neck, my fingers burying themselves into his dark hair. The sweet, heavy scent of our mingled pheromones washed over us, sealing the fated bond completely and irreversibly. The crowd around us finally broke into a massive, deafening cheer, but I barely heard it. My entire universe was right here, holding me. When we finally broke apart, breathless and smiling like idiots, Kalen rested his forehead against mine. You do realize, Kalen murmured, a teasing, boyish glint returning to his eyes, that you just publicly threatened a billionaire. You're a menace, Orion. I learned from the best, I whispered back, leaning up to kiss him one more time. Besides, I had to protect my enigma. Someone's got to keep you out of trouble. Kalen laughed, a rich, beautiful sound that echoed brightly in the morning air. He laced his fingers through mine once again, bringing my knuckles to his lips for a soft kiss. Let's go home. Years later, I would still look back on that day as the moment my life truly began. Marcus Vance kept his word. He cut Kalen off completely, but he never dared to touch my scholarship or leak our locations, terrified of the leverage Kalen still held over him. But Kalen didn't need the Vance empire. He was brilliant, driven, and fiercely independent. He built his own company from the ground up, entirely on his own terms, and completely devoid of the corruption that poisoned his father's legacy. As for me, I graduated at the top of my class. I wasn't the invisible scholarship student hiding in the shadows anymore. I was an honors graduate, a respected researcher, and most importantly, I was endlessly, hopelessly loved. I stood in the kitchen of our spacious, sunlit apartment, pouring 2 cups of coffee. The front door unlocked, and the heavy, comforting scent of cedarwood and rain instantly filled the room. Kalen walked in, dropping his briefcase by the door. He looked older, even more handsome, with the relaxed, easy confidence of a man who had fought his demons and won. He didn't even take his coat off before walking up behind me, wrapping his strong arms around my waist, and burying his face in the crook of my neck. He breathed in my sweet jasmine scent, letting out a long, contented sigh as his body relaxed against mine. "Rough day at the office?" I asked softly, leaning back into his solid chest. "Doesn't matter," Kalen murmured, pressing a soft kiss to the sensitive skin just below my ear, right over the dark, elegant bite mark that permanently marked me as his mate. "I'm home now, and you're here. That's all that matters." I turned around in his arms, looking up into those storm-gray eyes that used to terrify me, but now only brought me infinite peace. I reached up, gently brushing a stray lock of dark hair from his forehead. The campus enigma that everyone had feared, the untouchable god of Etheria University, had given up the entire world just to hold me. And every single day, as I looked at the man who had loved me enough to burn his own legacy to the ground, I knew that being his destined Omega was the greatest gift the universe could have ever given me. End of story. Wow, what an incredible journey Kalen and Orion have taken us on. Let's take a few minutes to dive deeper into the themes and character arcs that made this story so captivating. At its core, this story is a beautiful subversion of the traditional Enigma and Omega dynamic. In a society where power, wealth, and biology strictly dictate your place in the world, Orion starts off as the ultimate underdog. He is a scholarship student with no pack, heavily scarred by a traumatic past, whose entire survival strategy revolves around being completely invisible. But what makes Orion such a phenomenal protagonist is his unyielding resilience. He might be terrified, but he never actually backs down. Even in that very first lecture hall scene, his instinct to submit is overpowered by his demand for basic human respect. He refuses to be just another pawn in an Enigma's game, and that defiance is his true superpower. Then we have Kalen Vance. On the surface, he is the terrifying, untouchable campus god. He wears his Enigma dynamic like a heavy suit of armor, using his overwhelming power to keep the world at a calculated distance. But the moment his fated mate is introduced, that flawless armor shatters. What makes Kalen's character arc so compelling is that his dominance isn't used to oppress Orion. It is weaponized entirely to protect him. Kalen realizes that the very world he was born to rule is inherently toxic and dangerous to the person he loves. His journey is about learning how to be a safe haven rather than a dictator. The climax of the story, the tense confrontation with Marcus Vance, perfectly ties these emotional arcs together. It would have been so easy for the narrative to let the powerful Enigma do all the saving. Kalen was literally ready to burn down a multi-billion-dollar empire and his own legacy to keep Orion safe. But the true emotional payoff comes when Orion steps out from behind Kalen's broad shoulders to face Marcus himself. That defining moment proves that their bond isn't just about unavoidable biological fate, it is an active, conscious choice. Orion chooses to fight for Kalen, proving that true strength doesn't come from money, status, or an alpha dynamic. It comes from having someone worth fighting for. They didn't just blindly accept destiny. They chose each other every step of the way, overcoming class divides and a corrupt system to build a life on their own terms. Thank you so much for experiencing this intense and beautiful story with me. If you love this deep dive and want more heart-melting romances and dynamic tropes, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Give this video a big thumbs up, and let me know down in the comments what your favorite moment between Kalen and Orion was. I love reading your thoughts. This is your BL boyfriend, signing off. Stay safe, stay beautiful, and keep loving.